Thanks, Paul. You know what's funny is when Paul said, "I pray that you keep me out of the way," I was trying to circle around Paul. So, I don't know if we're praying in a literal sense or a spiritual sense. But anyway, my name is Zach. I'm the young adult pastor and the online campus pastor here at Park Valley. So if you saw a big mess up in Easter, it was 100% my fault. I don't think I really messed anything up, though. I think it all worked. Did anybody watch the stream? Did it work? I got one person. Maybe you guys didn't watch it because it didn't work. Who knows? But, so we're starting out a new series called Biblical Reliability. I can never name a series. I can't do it. I just name it what it is. Our last series was just called Easter because that's what we were talking about. I didn't know. I can't come up with a cool term for it. So I'm just going to call it what it is. It's biblical reliability, and we want to walk through a few things with it. Today, the main topic is, can it be trusted? Talking about the Bible. Like, can we trust the Bible to be a reliable text? And really, why can we trust it to be a reliable text? Obviously, I believe that we can, but why can we do that? And then next week is our night of worship, so there's not really a message per se within that, but then we're going to dive into the Bible backing itself up, and we'll even touch on that tonight, and then we're going to talk about outside sources backing up the Bible as well. So it's going to be a great series. Hope you guys come every single Monday. Don't miss Riley. I don't know. We just made eye contact and it happened. But there are people out there who think the Bible is this old fuddy-duddy book and it just doesn't apply anymore. But I don't think that that's the case, right? I think the Bible does still apply, that it teaches good principles that we can apply to our life. Just because it was written eons ago doesn't mean that what they were writing about is not good for us to apply today. But a lot of people just don't even read it, and they make assumptions about it. And it's not just the Bible that people do this with. It's a lot of things. A lot of people just read the article they'll read the title of a news article and just make assumptions about that article and start commenting and get all angry about it. I saw one time that it had this title that I won't say because I don't know. I don't want to do it. But it had this title, and everyone was commenting like, it's like, this is ridiculous. Why would they let this happen? And then I actually clicked on it, and I read the article, which I already hate doing, because if you don't know how algorithms work, the more you comment on something, the more you like something, the more you click on it, or the more you watch it, you just support that video. The algorithm can't tell if it's a negative comment or a positive comment. It just knows that you're commenting it, right? And so it'll continue to boost that video more and more and more because it's getting interaction. That's all it cares about. So even if you think you're doing something good by commenting on something that you disagree with, you're actually not. You're actually boosting that. But I clicked on the article. I read it. The article had nothing to do with the title that it had. Has anybody ever come across that? Like straight clickbait, right? Like it had absolutely nothing to do with the title. And then I scrolled through the comments of the person who shared it, and only one other person acknowledged that. So everybody else who commented on this that was so angry about the title didn't actually read the article itself. I think it happens a lot. Look, it's an election year, so be careful. Read your articles, okay? Read them. Also, be weary of the algorithm, because the more you click on stuff, the more it puts that type of stuff in front of your face. And they're also writing articles for you to read it. I don't know if you guys know that. They don't necessarily care if the content is 100% true. They just want you to click on it, because as soon as you click on it, they start getting ad revenue and all that good stuff. Anyway, I digress. I should maybe do a social media series. You guys down for that? I'd probably just call it social media, since I can't name a series for anything. But people do the exact same thing with the Bible. They either hear things, or maybe they see a TikTok video, or maybe not for long. They won't see TikTok videos. I don't know. But they'll just make an assumption. I remember when I was in high school, I was sitting at a lunch table with a whole bunch of people, and there's this one girl who was specifically talking about the Bible, and she said, "I don't like the Bible because it tells you to come as you are, and then it asks you to change." And I remember stopping her for a second and just saying, "Have you actually read it?" And she just said, "Well, no." I'm like, maybe you should do that first, because the changes that you're kind of asked to make in the Bible, one, I think that they're natural changes. The more you grow your relationship with Christ, I think you will naturally start to change into that. I think of the SpongeBob meme and I look at Colin because we joke around about SpongeBob all the time, But they said act natural when he like gets on all fours and starts eating grass like a cow. I don't know why that's what popped in my head, but it was. There's nothing to do, I don't think, other than acting natural. But yeah, the reason it asks you to change is because those are good, healthy things. Like, it's not just going to benefit you in a spiritual sense, but that discipline that you're putting onto yourself is actually going to make you better in a health sense, like all around. I think of sleep. I love to stay up late. But you know who likes to wake up early? My daughter. She don't stay up late like I do, but she wake up early like I don't like to do. So either way, regardless of how late I stay up, my daughter wakes up at 7:30 in the morning, you know? And so regardless of how much sleep I have, I now have to wake up. So I could be disciplined and go to bed earlier and get a better night's sleep, but I don't always do that. But I can tell you I feel better when I do get a better night's sleep. I think better. I tend to react better. I'm in a better mood with people. So it's the discipline that really ultimately makes me better. And it's the same thing with the Bible. Like, sure, it's asking you to maybe change a little bit here and there. I mean, you come as you are. You don't have to clean yourself up before coming to Christ. But all the disciplines that you're learning in the Bible are good things. They're not bad things. It's only going to make you a better person. It's going to make you feel better. It's going to make you healthier and all of that. But we're not necessarily talking about that stuff. Like, I'm guilty of making assumptions like anybody else. You know, I make assumptions about people. Sometimes I make good assumptions, and the person kind of chops my legs out from under me. Sometimes I make bad assumptions, and I'm just a jerk for it. You know, like I'm not innocent when it comes to making assumptions. But our goal with this series is to give you as much information as we possibly can when it comes to this one. We're going to talk a lot about studying the Bible, but we also want to give you information that will help you just gain knowledge as well. So that way, when someone comes in and asks you a question or poses a problem, you have a little more tools in your tool belt to figure those answers out. I don't know about you guys, when I was in school, I always struggled in school, not because I was a bad student or I was unintelligent. I struggled a lot because I couldn't regurgitate information well, right? So I always struggled in history and science and things like that, but I excelled in math a lot because they would give you the formulas for the SOL, and I could remember what formula to put to what equation, but if I had to ramble off that formula without it right in front of me, I couldn't do it. You know, so like I always had a hard time regurgitating information, so I learned very well, not necessarily how to memorize things well, but how to find the answers that I was looking for, right? And when I look back, I remember thinking like, I know this one verse in the Bible. I can't remember what it is. I briefly remember what it says. I remember that it was on the right page, not the left page. But I also know that if I looked up this one word in like the little concordance in the back of my Bible, that it would point me to the exact spot that I needed to be. So it's like I didn't need to remember the reference or the exact content of the verse, but I could very easily remember the process in which it took me to get there. I don't know why my brain works that way, but that's just how it does, right? Everybody's brain is a little bit different. So I hope that this stuff will help you guys just as much as it helps me. But the first thing I wanted to look at is things to know when studying the Bible. Number one, it can be trusted. And why can it be trusted? There should be a whole whoosh, this doodad here. This is something crazy. I think I showed it to you guys in the fall, but we're going to talk about it again. And there's a few different works on here from different authors. So these are different books or history records or stuff like that. This is what they use for like your textbooks in school to determine whether or not something is historically accurate, right? There's a standard to deciding if something is historically accurate or not. Now, the first thing on there is you have the author Homer, and the work is the Iliad. Now, it's a fictional text, but as some of you might know, this is considered one of the most accurate retellings of the original story. Right? And so a couple of these columns is you have the date written, the earliest manuscript, right? So the next time that somebody copied it down, and then the time gap between those two. So it was written 800 BC. The earliest known manuscript is 400 BC, which is a time gap of 400, right? And so what you want is that time gap to be small. You don't want it to be big, right? So from the time that something happened to the time that it was recorded, and even to the time when people started copying it, the shorter that is, the more likely that it was an accurate retelling, right? And so you can look through all these different things. Some of these things are just like writing dates down and all that stuff. And these are all different works or books that are written that are considered historically accurate. Now, when you get down to like the Greek New Testament manuscripts, you can see that the date written was between 50 and 100 AD, and the earliest manuscript was AD 130. That's a time gap of about 50 years. Not to mention, when it comes to finding pieces of like the original text, there are about 5,838 pieces. Now you compare that to some other early New Testament translations and even the Old Testament, you come down, you got 66,000 of pieces that they have found of the original text compared to these other things that are 1,800, 109, 193, 210. So you can see that the standard that people determine something to be historically accurate, the Bible blows those standards out of the water. So it's not really a question of, can this be a reliable text? Like, it's whether or not people believe what happened in the Bible. But sometimes when it comes to the Bible, you got to read it like a history book. One of the assumptions I hear all the time is like, well, the Bible talked about slavery, so it must condone slavery. And we're like, there were slaves in that time, and it talked about it. Like, why does that automatically mean that you condone it? You know, it doesn't. It was just talked about because it reads like a history book. So that's something to know. Is the Bible reliable? Is it something that we can read and trust that what it says in there, what it says happened is what actually happened? Yes. And we can even believe that looking at what the standard is for stuff that they use at an academic level and what the Bible brings to the table on top of that. Now, when you go in to study the Bible, there's a few different contexts for you to look at. I'm not just talking about the context in which the words, like one verse was written. Like, you want to read the whole shebang, right? Sometimes if you read just one little verse, you can take it out of context, not grasp the full meaning. But if you read like the entire chapter, for example, you get a better understanding of it. But there's other contexts on top of that. One is historical context. You also have cultural context, and you have geographical context. But we're going to break these down a little bit. So historical context is simply when the book was written, right? Nothing too complicated. When the book was written. A good example of why this is important, if you look at Matthew chapter 1, verse 16, these are the bloodline of Jesus. So when it gets in there, it does it in Matthew and Luke, and when it gets in there, it says like the entire bloodline back to Adam, right? And so there's two. If you look Matthew chapter 1, verse 16, it says, and Jacob, the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, and Mary was the mother of Jesus, who is called the Messiah. Then you look at Luke chapter 3, verse 23, and it says, now Jesus himself was about 30 years old when he began his ministry. He was the son, so it was thought, of Joseph, the son of Heli. So what could happen is you look at these two verses and be like, oop, the Bible contradicts itself. We got it. Joseph can't have two dads. That's not biologically possible, let alone in this time period. But when you break it down, in that time period, they didn't record women in the bloodline. It's not something that they did. In fact, when you got married, they didn't use terms like father-in-law or son-in-law. You were just now that family's son, right? So I have in-laws. Their names are Bill and Karen, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law. If this was biblical times, when I married Catherine, I wouldn't only be Becky and Jimmy's son, I would also be considered Bill and Karen's son, right? And so when it came to recording our bloodline, they wouldn't even mention my wife, Catherine. They would record me as the next person in line. So they would say I was the son of Bill, and they would say I was the son of Jimmy, or James, if you want to use his legal name, James Alvin, to be exact. But this can be an example where people could look at this and be like, well, this is contradicting itself because Joseph, it's saying that Joseph has two different dads. But really, when it gets to Luke, that is Mary's bloodline that it's recording. So Mary is the daughter of Heli, not Joseph. But when they got married, they recorded it as if Joseph was the son because that's just how they did things in that time period. So it's important to know the historical context. And sometimes when you come across things like this, you can just back it up to the period and how did they record things, how did they do things at that time in history. And it's going to give you a better understanding of everything that's going on, right? The next thing to look at is cultural context. And a really great example of this verse, it makes me giggle a little bit. but especially in the New King James Version, it's a little more descriptive. This one is 1 Timothy chapter 2, verse 9, and it says this, in like manner also, he's giving a bunch of instructions to the people that he's writing to, that the women adorn themselves in modest apparel, with propriety and moderation, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly clothing. I don't want to point any fingers, but we will. Show of hands, ladies. Who here has ever worn a braid in your hair? It's okay. Don't be bashful. Sinners. I can't believe. No, it's not even about the braid, right? So you back into, once again, pulling in historical context. Oh, Ben's worn a braid in his hair? For shame. But you back it up to the historical context, right? Like the time period and then the specific culture that this author was writing to. And what it comes down to is the women of that time period who were wearing braids in their hair were prostitutes. So it wasn't so much about the braid. It was about like, hey, if you're trying to communicate Jesus to someone and you put a braid in your hair, that's going to hinder that. So is the braid worth it? Now, look, the braid analogy doesn't so much apply today, right? The way you wear your hair, ladies, it doesn't matter. As far as your career goes, I don't think. I don't know. Maybe if you took your long hair and put like a water bottle in it and then threw your hair up around it. You guys ever seen that? It's pretty crazy. You might not get hired at a job interview if you do that. I don't think anybody's going to necessarily look down on you or anything like that. A better example might be when it comes to cussing. For us in this time period might be a better example. The Bible says to remove slander from your lips. It doesn't give us a list of what words are bad words. So what makes the F-bomb the F-bomb, right? It's that our society or our culture has decided that these words are slanderous, right? So it's like no one's made that up except for us. So while there is maybe a world in which I could go to a place and use some cuss words and witness to somebody and tell them about Jesus, and it may be super, super effective to that person. I think that not only by not cussing can I still tell that person about Jesus, but I think it opens up a wider audience for me as well. Because then you start getting into people who are super, super legalistic when it comes to Christianity, and if you say those words in the front of those people who need Jesus just as much as someone who doesn't claim to know Christ at all, they're not going to listen to a word that you say. So I think that it's just a better way of telling people about Jesus. It's not about the word. It's about how am I going to effectively communicate Christ to someone who needs him. And I think by not using these words, it's going to be more effective to more people. Right? So sometimes it comes down to what is your society determining that is slanderous, and is it worth it when you're trying to communicate Jesus to somebody? Now, look, if I'm helping some dude install a dryer into his house and he drops it on his foot and he says a dirty word, I'm not going to back up and be like, yo, everyone put some rubber shoes on. This dude about to get struck. You know, I don't go running out of the house and being like, my ears, no. I'm not going to do any of those things. I'm just going to be like, dang, dude, is your foot okay? In fact, I remember riding the school bus. I went to public school. Anybody else? Public schoolers? Yeah. I ridded myself of cussing at a pretty early age. It was a discipline I learned early. And so I remember one time being on the bus, and it can become like a really good point of conversation if you don't cuss. It's happened a few times in my life, even as an adult, which is really weird. But I remember being on the school bus, and someone brought it up. They're like, did you know that Zach doesn't cuss? And I'm sitting there like, yeah, that's crazy. And some dude was like, there's no way that Zach doesn't cuss. I'm like, I don't know what to tell you, man. It's just not what I do. He's like, well, what do you say when you stub your toe? And I'm like, ow. I say, ow. I don't know why I got to turn into a sailor every time I stub my toe a little bit. It doesn't have to be that way. Look, I'm not perfect. I'm not saying I've never said a cuss word in my whole life. But look, I went to public school. I heard a thing or two. You know, I saw a thing or two written on the bathroom walls. I figured out what those things meant, you know. I once went into the locker room during gym class. I forgot something, so like the whole class was out of the locker room. I ran back in there, and this dude is holding like this bag of weed, and he just smells it. And I open the door, and we just make eye contact, and he puts the bag down and looks at me, and he's like, don't do weed, man. And I'm like, I wasn't planning on it. I just got to get some out of my lager. And then in my mind, I was like, dude, if you can't get through the day without smelling it, like, that's not good. That's a bad sign. You should probably try and get off that stuff. Just because it's legal doesn't make it healthy. You know what I'm saying? There's probably plenty of foods out there that should be outlawed. I probably eat a lot of those things. Sugar is probably one that shouldn't be around. Anyway, so there's a lot that like our society determines to be slander. So when you're looking at the Bible, and maybe it might ask you to do this ridiculous thing, and you're like, what? I can't wear pants? This is crazy. And you're like, hold on, back up. Let's take a look at the cultural and historical context that's going around this verse. And there's a lot of different ways that you can find that. One, Google is a wonder. You can type it in to Google. There's also a free software called Logos. There's a cricket on the light? Crazy. Maybe we can get out of here before it starts chirping. But just slow down and do a little bit of research on that verse. Ask some questions if you still can't figure it out. I do it all the time when I'm sitting in the office. I had someone ask me that question about the bloodline of Jesus, which is how I knew to bring it up to you guys. And I remember I think I pulled like everybody in the office into that conversation. I was like, Will, help this make sense. Like, I'm just not understanding it. And they helped me like figure it out step by step, like bring other people into the process as well. You guys can feel free to ask me anything at any time. I may not respond right in the moment. Like if you text me at 7 o'clock at night, I'm either here or I'm rocking my kid to sleep. You can still text me. I'll just respond at like 8:30, 9 o'clock. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm not going to put my kid down and be like, hold on, Maisie, I have to answer Brett real fast. She probably wouldn't mind, actually. She loves Brett. She does. You helped me put my couch together, Brett. Everybody loves you. Every time I sit on my couch, I'm like, this is the cushion that Brett assembled. That was weird. That took a weird turn. We're going to keep going. Cultural context. We already talked about that. Geographical context. Believe it or not, this matters. And I remember when I was learning about it, it'd be like, why does where something take place matter to the content that they're writing? And it may not necessarily matter to the point that it's trying to make. I think it can give us a like richer, deeper look at it. So if you go to the next slide, whoosh, there it is. This is a little map. Now, if you think about the Bible story of the lady at the well, if you don't know, it's not a big deal. Basically, Jesus, who was a Jew, went to Samaria, which was a big no-no, right? Jews hated Gentiles, they hated Samaritans, and all that stuff, right? So they did not go into Samaria. And so now what they would do, the red line is the path that the Jews would take, and obviously the quickest path is the white line. So instead of saving themselves hours, days, miles, they would rather walk around this area to get from Judea or Jerusalem up to Galilee, right? Like they would rather do that than cross through this land because they hated these people so much. Jesus, however, goes straight into it and talks to this woman at the well. So when you start to look at geographical context and you compare it to this map, you can see how big of a deal that actually was. That like his people, right, the Jews, hated these other people so much that they didn't even want to step foot in the land. But Jesus saw value in this woman so much that he said, it's worth it. And then you dive into that story a little bit further and you dive into like the cultural context of it as well when you find out that she had 5 different husbands throughout her life. In that time and in that culture, nobody would have wanted anything to do with her. Jesus sat down and had a conversation with her. Jesus thought that that woman was worth it. That she was worth so much for him to walk into a place that he wasn't supposed to walk into, to talk to somebody that he wasn't supposed to talk to. And that's the kind of stuff that we can get lost a little bit when we just briefly read through some of the scripture. Is that he didn't care who this lady was. What he cared about is her knowing and understanding his love for her. And so he didn't care what anybody else thought. Man, you read through that story, you even kind of see the disciples on the side being like, hey, we should probably hustle on out of here. You know, like leave this lady by herself and let's go. And he's just like, go on, fellas. I got this. Like, he took time to talk to this person who, even in her own culture, was probably somebody that nobody wanted to talk to. It's just crazy to me. It's like, man, you start breaking this stuff down even deeper. Maybe a story that you thought you understood, or maybe there's really not even all this new information that you're learning, but to just be able to look at this stuff and understand that it's a little bit deeper than what we thought it was, or it's a little bit bigger of a deal than what we thought it was before. But when it comes to us, man, I think Jesus thinks that every single one of us is worth it. He doesn't care what anybody else thinks about you. He doesn't even care what you've done. He doesn't even care what you think about yourself. What he cares about is you. I've heard it explained like $100 bill, you know, and you can crumple up $100 bill, and how much is it worth? $100. You can throw that $100 bill on the ground. How much is it worth? $100. You can step on the $100 bill and smush it around a little bit. How much is it worth? $100, not 100 cents. That'd be $1. You can spit on it like hock a loogie. I can't even do it. You spit on it and then step on it, get it all muddy and nasty and stuff. How much is it worth? Still worth $100. So when Jesus looks at you, even though you might feel stepped on and spit on and ground into the dirt a little bit, maybe you feel like I don't know about you guys, but sometimes in my own life, I feel kind of like that circle peg that goes into the square hole. Like, you can kind of fit it in there, but it just doesn't fit quite right. I feel like that sometimes. Like, sometimes my brain works differently than other people's brains. Sometimes I'm a little bit louder than other people in a room. Sometimes I'm a little bit crazier. I don't read the room well. Like, I don't think that I necessarily always fit into where I am. Jesus doesn't care about any of that. He doesn't care about what other people's opinions are. Some people might think it's a big deal that I like to wear sweatpants and I don't like to wear real pants, right? Jesus doesn't care about any of that. Whatever it is about you, maybe it's something that you've done, maybe it's something that has happened to you, Jesus doesn't care about any of that. What he cares about is you. What he cares about is the person that he created, and what he sees is the value that he put into you, not necessarily the value that you see when you look into the mirror. One of the most popular verses in the Bible is John 3:16, right? It says, "For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God," that's not it. That's Romans 6:23. I saw Sammy's head turn, and I was like, I'm saying the wrong thing. John 3:16 says that whoever believes in me will not perish, but have everlasting life, right? It's probably one of the most popular verses in the Bibles. The next verse, 17, I think is equally as powerful, because it says that Christ didn't come to condemn the world, he came to save it. And if you look throughout the scriptures, who does Jesus condemn over and over and over again? It's the religious elite. It's the legalistic people. It's the people that are so caught up with the rules that they forgot about actually helping people. It's the people that when Jesus healed somebody of being blind, that they did everything to find something wrong with that moment. That's who he condemned over and over again. It's not the broken people. It's not the hurt people. Those are the people that he chased after. There's even a verse in there that says, the sick are the ones who need a doctor, not the healthy. It's the sinners who need a savior, not the righteous. He came for the sinners. And if you look at Romans chapter 3, verse 23, it says, all fall short of the glory of God, which means every single one of us in this room is considered a sinner. And even if it's an action that you did and you think, if I just stop doing that action, then I'll be okay, you're wrong, because you're already tainted. You've already been stained by the sin. So as much as you try to clean yourself off of that, you've already been stained by it. But Jesus still wants everything to do with you. He is the only one who can wash you clean. And it's because he was the perfect sacrifice. When he died on the cross, he had done no wrong. He had been tempted. Right? Satan came along and tempted this dude for 40 days. And he didn't cave into it. Even in the process of being crucified, he could have backed out at any moment. When Peter went and chopped one of the guards' ears off, Jesus not only took it and put it back on, but he's like, do you not think that I could call angels to come get me right now? Like, he didn't opt out of it because he wanted everything to do with you. He wanted everything to do with us. We don't got to be perfect. We don't got to clean ourselves up and dust ourselves off. We don't got to do any of that stuff. All we got to do is pursue a relationship with Jesus. And when I say pursue, I always imagine, and you guys have heard this before, that it's like you're walking down a road, and the whole time you're walking away from Jesus, it's like he's following after you. So when you do decide to turn around and pursue a relationship with Jesus, all you got to do is hug him because he's standing right there with you. It's not like you walk a mile and you're like, all right, I want to get back in this relationship with Jesus. I got to walk a mile back. No, like he's been following you that whole time. And even if you're here and you feel like you already have a relationship with Jesus, but maybe you've messed up a little bit and you screwed up a little bit, there's another great example in the Bible where Jesus goes and he washes the disciples' feet. And the reason why that was so important, one, it shows a lot of servant leadership, right? Like the person who was kind of the top dog of the pack usually wasn't the guy who got down and did the work of the servants. But Jesus got down and he washed the servants' feet. He took care of the people who followed him, right? Because he loved them and he cared about them. But the other great example in that is that in that time period, when people would bathe, they would do it in bathhouses. And so after you bathe in the bathhouse, you put your sandals back on, you walk home, and what gets dirty? Your feet. So sometimes in our walk home to Jesus, our feet get dirty a little bit. It's not necessarily that you need to get re-saved. It just means you got to go to Christ and have him wash your feet. And we know this because when he gets to the end of the line to Peter, Peter's the one who kind of resists a little bit at first. He's like, you're not the person to wash my feet. Like, don't wash my feet. You don't have to do that. And then Jesus is like, if I don't wash your feet, then you don't have anything to do with me. And then Peter gets a little bit weird, and he stands up. He's like, then wash my whole body, Jesus. And Jesus is like, well, ease up, tiger. We just got to wash your feet. It's the same thing with us. So if you guys want to close your eyes and bow your head, if you're here tonight and you've never accepted a relationship with Jesus, man, just remember what I said. You don't have to run a mile to get back to him. You just got to turn around and he's standing right there. That's it. That's all you got to do. You just got to accept what he did on the cross for you, and that's it. If you're here tonight and you feel like maybe your feet got a little dirty on your walk home, it's the same thing, man. All you got to do is let him wash your feet. You don't have to be the one to do that. And so if you're here and you either, from a metaphorical stance, want to get your feet washed, or maybe you need to fully accept Christ for the first time ever, you can pray something like this. You can say, God, I know I'm a sinner. I know I've messed up. But I'm ready to enter that relationship with you. I'm ready for you to wash my feet. God, I'm ready to pursue that relationship with you. Without anybody else looking around, man, if you guys prayed that prayer, just stick your hand up real quick. Just stick it right back down. Sweet. Let me pray for us. Father, thank you for today and just the opportunity we have to be here, to do this, to talk about you, and, man, maybe talk a little bit about some ways it looks to just help understand the Bible a little bit more. And, Father, I pray that everybody in here feels like we can work together to understand it a little bit more, God, that we don't have to figure it out by ourselves, that we can ask questions, and that if we have a doubt, that's not something that we're going to get thrown into the pits of hell for it, but it's something that we can ask a question and explore and figure out together, Father. And, man, I pray for everybody here who, man, either needs to get their feet washed or needs to get just fully bathed in a relationship with you, God, that, man, you give them the courage to do that. You give them the courage to just let go of whatever it is that they're holding on to. And, God, I just pray for safety for the rest of the night, that everyone makes it home safe, and that, man, we just have a great time for the rest of the night. And we pray for all this in your name. Amen.